Babylon, man, I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so deluded and it drives me crazy. Babylon, this lost world is so hopeless. Babylon, Jesus Christ, that's where hope is. Babylon, no matter what they say, it's still so lost.
And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot. And he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount. And he took the calf which they had made, and burnt it in the fire, and ground it to powder, and strawed it up with the water, and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said unto Aaron, what did this people unto thee, that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. Thou knowest the people, that they are set on mischief. For they had said unto me, make us gods, which we shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, he wot not what is become of him. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it unto me, and I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf. And when Moses saw that the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp, and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together with him. And he said unto them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from the gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. For Moses had said, consecrate yourselves to the day of the Lord, even every man upon his son and upon his brother, that he may bestow upon you a blessing this day. That is Exodus 32:19 through 29.
And this is the Resisting Balaam podcast, a podcast where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all of the accusations made by the world, the flesh, and the devil, as we engage the culture of death that demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Pastor Darren, that's Pastor Callie. This is a Wrath and Grace podcast. You can find out more about Wrath and Grace at wrathandgrace.com. The website's under construction right now, but I'm told that within the next few weeks, you're going to have that thing back up and going, so you can find out more there. You can also see the other podcasts that they have streaming on their Facebook page, facebook.com/ somebody get on me for that. It's / Wrath and Grace. Also want to encourage you guys to check out our Patreon account, patreon.com/ Resisting Balaam. There you can support our ministry for as little as $3 a month or as much as $20 a month. Get access to early content, get access to special member-only content, which we're working on producing some of right now. And then you can also get special member-only Resisting Balaam merch, which would include like a Resisting Balaam t-shirt, or Callie's book is one of the things we give away on there, Resisting Balaam coffee mugs. So all kinds of opportunities to get Resisting Balaam merch on there as well. So come in for as little as $3 a month or as much as $20 a month. And we appreciate our Patreons and the support that they give us. Your help and support allows us to continue to expand our audience. And so thank you so much for that. All right, Callie, we're continuing this series that we're working through right now, answering objections, common objections that people raise to our efforts to completely and totally criminalize abortion. I think we got a pretty good one that we're going to discuss today. And so why don't you go ahead and take it away with the objection we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, before I get to that, Wrath and Grace is not only redoing their website, but they're putting together an app that is uh, that's part of why it's taking so long with the construction of the website. Is they're trying to merge the platforms to where on the app you can stream a lot of the podcasts, the music, and go straight and purchase their stuff. And they're going to be putting out a lot more video content, teaching series, and things like that on the app. So while they're developing the app and trying to get the platforms all put together cohesively, that's part of what's taking so long. So um, the app should be really, really good. So be encouraged about that. Um, so for our
Yeah,
topic, right?
yeah. Go ahead.
Our topic. We're going to be discussing bodily autonomy today, um, and this idea comes in a lot of different forms, right? And the most generic one that we hear is "my body, my choice," right? So, how are we to respond to this objection? It's my body; it's my choice to do with it what I want to. Um, what does it mean when they appeal to bodily autonomy? Um, some of them do it actually correctly, and some of them don't. And I've heard responses that are good responses, and some that are just fall flat. So that's pretty much what we want to talk about today. And when we look at this biblically, what pretty much what we're talking about is the same idea of doing what is right in your own eyes, right?
Yeah.
Trying to de- defy the sovereign Lord who has the right to rule and reign of your lives. Um,
Yeah.
so,
I think
yeah.
I think so. Probably a good place to start this conversation would just be, definition of terms. When you rightly understand the concept of bodily autonomy, Callie, would you say that there is such a thing as a true and good concept of body autonomy?
Right. Yeah, I think there is, and for the Christian, it would be imaging God properly, right?
Yeah.
So yes, you have a will. You think and you make decisions, um, and you do so as an individual, right?
Yeah.
And I think that from a Christian perspective, there is a godly form of bodily autonomy, which is talking about liberty, right? That is the liberty that we have in Christ to obey Him. Um, However, what the world means by it is something completely different. What they are talking about complete and absolute autonomy from
Mhm.
any external force whatsoever, right?
Right.
So,
Right. And well, the interesting thing that we discover this is often the case when the world sort of has an idea that they borrow from, because so often this is the case. You have to live in the world that God created, right? And so oftentimes these concepts come from what are true, good, and just concepts inherent within a Christian worldview, but then they become sort of fabricated concepts divorced from God's law, divorced from God's purpose for society and so forth, and purpose for the individual, and then they become this meritless, baseless sort of understanding. And so, the reality is, a lot of the people that advocate for this concept of just free and open, sort of libertine body autonomy, right? Like it's my body, I can do whatever I want with it. Nobody can tell me that I can't do anything with it. But then, like, the more that we plumb the depths of that sort of viewpoint, the more we find out that nobody actually really believes that, right? I mean, people say that in regards to abortion, but I mean, I don't know. What are you? Is there anybody out there that actually really believes that you can literally just do whatever you want to do with your body without any boundaries?
no, of course we don't believe that, right? And we don't act as if we believe that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's kind of why we have laws and live in a civil society under the consent of the government. We all recognize that there are things that you cannot do, right? But it goes further than just that. I mean, we also recognize that there's consequences to the things that we do. But
Sure.
let's go ahead and get down into what do they mean by bodily autonomy. What is the argument that they are trying to make?
Yeah, so I think what the version of it that I've heard the most, and of course it's presented in different ways. But I want to take an example and maybe discuss a little bit here from the abortion mill, because we hear this a lot when we're out at the abortion mill. Lady be going
Hmm.
into the abortion mill. You'll try to plead with her for the life of her baby. You'll call her to repent of her sin. You'll share the gospel with her. You'll offer her help, and she'll, if you can get her to engage in a conversation with you, one of the things she'll often say is, "My body, it's my body, my choice," or some version of that. And as you get into the discussion, essentially what she means when she says that is that this baby is inside of my body. This baby depends upon my body in order for him or her to survive. And since this is my body and I possess ownership of my body and I get to decide what I do and don't want to do with my body, I choose not to allow this baby to continue to grow inside of me. And so I'm going to go into this abortion clinic and I'm just going to go ahead and kill this baby because this baby can't continue to live without my body. So that is that is one of the main arguments. So then so that's sort of, you hear that at the abortion mill and not so many words. And then to put sort of the finer veneer on it, I've had this conversation with like feminists and sort of the academic sphere and things like that, and they'll talk about body autonomy, and they'll say you're not even giving women the same level of you don't give women the same level of body autonomy that you give a corpse. They'll say, you can't even take the organs from a dead person without them having consented to it ahead of time, or something like that. And I'm sure we'll get into that analogy maybe on the second half of the break. But I think that the general idea is I possess ownership of my body. This baby is inside of me, and I am not morally obligated to provide this baby my body so that it can have life. And it's of my own free will that I can go into this abortion mill and I can go ahead and murder this baby. I think that's the argument in a nutshell.
Yeah, it is, and I think you've said something that's really good. Is that they recognize that it's their body that the baby is dependent upon. So sometimes when people say my body, my choice, when you're talking about on a very low level, people that haven't really thought through much of the bodily autonomy argument, and they're just regurgitating phrases, they're just saying, hey, this is my body, I can do with it as I want to. And I think improperly, a lot of people in response that haven't thought through the arguments will say something like, well, the body that's in your body is not your body. And that's true, right? So they'll start pointing to things like, how many hands are there? How many feet are there? Trying to prove that the baby is not part of their body.
Yeah.
And really, that's not part of the bodily autonomy argument, right? It's true that body isn't your body, um, and that might work on a very low end to just like somebody who hasn't thought through the argument, that likewise is just saying out slogans. But as you pointed out, it goes deeper than that, and really this is part of the problem with. I mean, there's a lot of problems, but one of the problems with like the libertarians that are pro-choice or pro-abortion, right? It's this whole, you need consent of that other person, or you can evict them. And
Yeah.
this is one of the things that I want to get to here in a little bit. But what you are saying, I think, is correct. That this argument is not just, hey, there's a human inside you, so there's a distinct human in you So the response is not the body inside your body is not your body. They know that, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's man, I appreciate the fact that you brought up that point. I think one of the things that would be useful to talk about here in regards to some of these objections that we're having, that you're putting your finger on here, is that one of the dangerous things that can happen. I don't know if dangerous is the right word. One of the silly things that we can do that's not helpful is answer their slogans with our slogans, right? And so then all of a
Hmm.
sudden you really have no communication happening at that point. You have one person that quoted a slogan from their side and another person that quoted a slogan from their side, and they're both sort of disregarding what the other is saying. That woman is just going to kind of go in there and kill her baby because you're at the surface level of communication at that point. You haven't gone beyond. And of course, in the abortion mill context, you got 5 seconds between the car and the door. And so you have to figure that out. But when we're actually having these discussions, we don't want to make a habit of answering slogans with slogans. We want to try to take time to carefully
Right.
understand what the other person is actually saying and address the actual argument itself, not some straw man version of the argument that we just. This happens when you say, well, when somebody says that, I always say this back. Well, you shouldn't always say the same thing back necessarily.
Hmm.
Take some time to listen and understand the argument and then formulate an answer based on the actual argument itself and give a reasonable answer back. And so in this case, the idea of my body, my choice is this idea. It's not that the baby inside of the woman is part of her body. It's that the baby inside of the woman is dependent upon her body to survive. That's actually the
Right.
argument. And I don't
Right.
want the woman is saying, I don't consent to having this baby inside of me.
Hmm.
And I don't consent to this baby using my body to stay alive. And getting that, like boiling it down to that point, I think helps us to better give a good answer to the objection that's
Hmm.
being made here, which has more to do with consent than it does to do
Right.
with whether or not the baby inside of the woman is a separate human being. Because I don't think anybody rationally, I mean, they may try to rationalize that the baby isn't a human, but very few people even try to make that argument anymore. This
Right.
argument is about consent. If we're to boil it down to
Right.
its lowest, most basic level, it's about consent.
And I think that's a good place to start with how do we address this, right? Because there's a first level when you talk about, well, you've already consented by having sex,
Yeah,
right? Knowing that that is a very real possibility that a new human would form, right? So
right,
consent was given when you engaged in the sexual activity that causes the creation of a new instantiation of humanity, right? And I think that's a good place to begin. And I think we'll deal with rape here a little bit later because that does happen, and we need to be able to address the bodily autonomy argument from that perspective as well. Um, but
yeah,
so a good place to start on this idea of consent is the fact that you had sex knowing that there's a high probability that a new human would form from as a direct result of that act that you committed, right?
right. Yeah. I think our friend Laura Klassen has a great video on this that I would encourage people to go look at. I don't know what it's called, but you can find it out there. In the video, she's got a plate of donuts basically sitting there. I don't know if you've seen this one. And she takes a
Hmm.
donut off the top and she's like, by eating this donut, I'm not consenting to getting fat, right? I better not get fat because I'm eating this donut. Just by virtue of eating this donut, I'm not. And the idea, I think she's great at irony. And the irony that she's trying to draw there is that there is a logical connection between consuming calories that come from a donut and being unhealthy, gaining weight, and so forth. When you take an action that that you know potentially brings about a certain result, by virtue of the fact that you have taken that, consented to take that action, you are then therefore consenting to the potential of that result. And so this sort of relates to, you started talking about the libertarian argument earlier, which I sort of, for a season, sort of delved into libertarianism, and spent some time reading like Rothbard and some of those guys. And I don't want to go too far off into the weeds about that, but I do think that it's a worthy thing to discuss, because I think this particular topic is very heavily influenced by libertarian thought, especially when you're thinking about things like consent, that whole concept of consent, which has its proper place. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But in regards to consent, one of the concepts in sort of the libertarian thought is that the baby is inside of the woman, and the woman sort of becomes like a landlord. And if at any point she decides that she wants to evict the baby, then she can evict the baby because her body belongs to her. The problem with that whole argument is it doesn't take under consideration that the existence of the baby is the result of the decisions that the mother made. The existence of the baby is the result of the consent that was given at the moment of conception. And so that is a very important, I think we should pursue that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
you pursue that a little bit more.
Right. So that stream of thought moves from, okay, you give your initial consent when you have sex to have the child, right? To that a child could form, right? So there's that initial consent in the initial action that you have. But what they're arguing is that the consent must be continuous and not just a one-time consent giving and then you're just out of luck after that. That it demands a continual consent of the owner of the property. Otherwise, there's a breach of contract and you can evict them. Because when you're talking about like the landlord, right?
Yeah.
Which is what this moves into. So they argue that not only do you need the initial consent, going along with the landlord thing of allowing them into your property to stay and use your property, but there is consent that must be given continually for you to continue to stay there. And if at some point the landlord is done with you using his property for the exchange of whatever goods and services happen during that transaction, then it is the right of the property owner to evict you from the property, right?
Yeah.
So that would move us into the second part, which is more than just you gave the initial consent by having sex, but now there is a continued amount of consent that the property owner, the one with the body that is being used, has to give until the baby no longer is using the mother's body to sustain itself.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time defining what the issue is. We're going to take a quick break here. We're going to run into our street ministry segment. And then when we come back, now that we've taken time to define what the issue itself is, what the objection is, we're going to take some time to give an answer. So we'll be right back from the street ministry segment in just a minute here.
Hi, my name is Wendell Schrock. I currently live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I am a full-time evangelist. I do preach at the murder mills full-time. A number of years ago, I don't remember how long ago it was, I would say it's been a long time ago now. I was living in Texas, Edna, Texas area, Victoria, Edna, Texas area. And my family and I were in Edna, Texas shopping. And we see this guy with all these tattoos. And we were a little intimidated. And I had just gone through a class called The Way of the Master. And I was sharing the gospel with everybody, but I was intimidated, and I walked out and I didn't share the gospel with this guy. And my son, when we got going down the road, my son was like, "Dad, why didn't you share the gospel with that guy?" And I felt so convicted. I was like, because I told my son, I said, because in my heart, I felt like there was no hope for him. And I prayed about that, and I was broken about it. And maybe a week or two later, we were in Tractor Supply. The first meeting was in Walmart late in the evening. We were in Tractor Supply, and we see this gentleman with all the tattoos. And I walked up to him and I gave him a gospel tract, and he was very receptive to it. And I was really surprised. Well, life went on, and we went on about our way, and we leave Texas. My son, the one who asked me, why didn't you give him a gospel tract, ends up being in Texas looking for a church. And I hear about this guy with all these tattoos that has a church. So I called my son and I said, you need to go to his church. And so he went and visited, and it was the same guy. His name was C.R. Calley, by the way. The same guy that we met in Walmart that night and then in Tractor Supply. And just to add to this story, the other day, about January I should say, I was all the way in Phoenix, Arizona at a murder mill preaching, and there's a rally going on there. And I hear this guy behind me telling some other guys about this guy that has all these tattoos, and he's now a pastor and God saved him. And so I just want to point out that, guys, if you think that somebody can't be saved, or you think that they're too far gone, or you think that you're intimidated, man, don't be a man-fear. Go to him and give him the gospel, give him a tract, give him, anyway, it was a blessing. Now I know CR, I've met him again, and he's a huge blessing in my life. He has a wonderful ministry. I read, if you need to get his book, Balaam, right? Is that what it's called? Balaam. I read that book, and it changed my perspective on the fight that we're fighting. Some wonderful information in there you guys need. So, yeah, get to know C.R. Calley. He will bless your life. He blessed our family's life. He blessed my life especially. Thank you.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
Not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
All right, so we're back from the Street Ministry segment here. I want to take this quick opportunity here to invite you. If you're involved in street ministry, you're out street preaching, regardless of the venue, you have a 3 to 5 minute video you want to reach out to us with that kind of goes through some experience that you had when you were out on the street telling people about Jesus. I want to invite you to shoot that video either to Callie or I. We'll take a look at it. If we can get it to fit in one of our episodes, then we will drop it into an episode, and we appreciate you guys being willing to do that. And we always need more of those because we're putting a new one in every video. So definitely shoot those to us. If you're interested in getting involved in street ministry and you just don't know how, reach out to Callie or I, and we'd be happy to have a more extended discussion with you about that. So what we've done at this point, Callie, is I think we've boiled the issue down. What the issue boils down to is the woman essentially, does the woman have the moral obligation once a child is conceived in her? Does the woman have a moral obligation to consent for that child to continue to use her body, so to speak, in order to grow and form until that child is ready to be delivered out of her body? I think that's the issue. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. Right. And the way that this usually comes out in conversation is with the master violinist. Right. That analogy really does a good job of breaking apart a lot of the different aspects to the morality of this idea that we're talking about when we're talking about the consent to use your body and the obligation that you have to others' lives. Right. So I think the best way to answer that question that you're bringing up, which is the question to ask, is to deal with this master violinist question, which when you're talking, it's going to pop up
Yeah.
almost all the time. This is the argument that they go to. Now, some of them do a better job of understanding the analogy and recognize that the analogy is, if you look at the analogy, the closest that you can come to is rape, right? And when they don't at least accept that, call them out on it and make sure that, yeah, okay, let's look through your analogy. However, you have to look at it honestly, right?
Yeah.
So the analogy goes something like this, right? You get bonked on the head, you wake up, and you are attached medically, through surgery, to a master violinist who has kidney failure or whatever disease thing they happen to use, and he's attached to your kidney and will die if you sever that connection, and the world will lose this master violinist who plays the most beautiful music, whatever, right? So do you have the responsibility to continue to have the master violinist connected to you, or he will die, right? So that's the moral argument that they're trying to get to, which is the question we're asking. Do you have a moral obligation to keep that person alive by having them connected to your kidney, right?
Yeah.
So how does this relate to abortion? Let's first go through that, right? What you need to do is point out that this is more associated to rape than it is to the actual consent of having sex with another person and a baby being conceived, right? Because in this analogy, you're bonked on the head, you wake up, and you're connected to this person. You didn't give that initial consent to have sex that could produce the baby, just like you didn't give the initial consent to be connected to the master violinist person. So straight off the bat, make sure when they bring this up that you recognize and point out to them, okay, we're going to deal with this analogy that you have, but let's do it honestly. And the analogy would put it to rape in particular, right?
Right.
Because you want to talk about consent, because that's what the argument is based off of, right?
Yeah.
So get them to at least acknowledge that the argument is about rape and not about the consent that you have sex with someone. All right. Would you agree that's a good place to start?
I do. I totally agree. I think if it's not about rape, and this is what I've said to people that have brought this analogy up, I totally agree with you that that's where you want to take the conversation, because we're trying to talk about consent. If it's not about rape, then this analogy is comparing two things that aren't alike in the way that you're trying to compare
Right.
them, right? And so
Right.
the whole thing falls flat. It totally doesn't work, because you got bonked on the head and then you were attached to this violinist. You have no moral culpability in that scenario at all whatsoever. But if a baby is
Okay.
conceived by the direct result of your own actions, then you do have moral culpability. And so we can't compare things.
Right.
You can't use an analogy to compare things that aren't alike in the way that you're trying to compare them. But if we are talking about rape,
Right.
then it does become a legitimate analogy, because the woman who was raped doesn't have moral culpability in the conception of the baby. And so that does, I mean, we're gonna come around and answer that here, but that does.
Right.
So if she doesn't have moral culpability in the conception, does she have a moral obligation still to carry the baby is the question. And so
Right.
the analogy,
So
I agree with you laid that out there.
so how does this analogy work out then, right? So if you sever the connection and you want to go about your own business, this is my body. I don't consent to my kidney being used by the master violinist. I cut it off, and he dies, right?
Yeah.
That's really where this is going. right?
Sure.
So what are
Yeah.
the differences between this and a baby, right? One, let's talk about the organ, right? He is using my kidney to sustain his life. Now, my kidney was designed and made to sustain my life, right?
Yeah.
The purpose of my kidney is to flesh out the impurities for me in particular,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah.
not created for everybody else. Can it be used for some people? Some people it can be used for temporarily, but it was designed specifically for me. Now, what
Yeah.
is a womb created for, right?
Yeah.
The functionality of the female reproductive system is for the child, right?
That's it.
The womb itself is designed to house the baby, not the woman, right?
Yeah.
So the functionality of that organ is in its design for this child that you want to evict, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that that is one difference, right? Now, it's not a major difference as far as like I wouldn't end there, but it is
Yeah.
a substantial one, right? The
Yeah.
the womb itself was made for the child to grow and develop, whereas a kidney is designed for your own self and the purification of your own blood, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a strong place to start the argument that the when the baby is in the mother's womb, and you could talk about the womb, you could talk about the whole rest of the process. When a woman is growing a baby inside of her body, barring some sort of like genetic problem or something like that, her body is functioning in the way that God created for it to function across the board.
Hmm.
Womb,
Right,
the ovaries, the whole of her body is functioning the way God created for it to function. God did not create for your kidney to be shared between two individuals. And so, right off the bat, here again, we're comparing two situations in a way that they're not alike. And
right,
I tend to point this out every step of the way when it comes to pro aborts and analogies, because they often have a tendency of bringing these comparisons between things that don't actually connect to one another. And so,
right.
that would be one great example. A kidney and a womb are very different. And that would be a good place, I think, to start the argument. So you're saying,
So,
but that's not the whole of your argument. So what would your next argument
right,
after that be?
right. So the next thing that I probably would talk about is so this master violinist is going to die from some kidney disease or kidney failure, which is why he needs to be connected to you. What's killing the violinist person is that disease, right?
Yeah,
What's killing them is the fact that they don't have the kidney to purify the blood or whatever disease thing they have. That is what they are dying from. So if you disconnect your kidney from them, what kills them is whatever disease or their own kidney failure, their disease is what kills them, not you cutting off your kidney, right?
right.
Now, when you're talking about a baby in the womb, what kills that baby is you going in and killing the baby. There's an active step of you ripping the baby limb from limb. There's an active step of you injecting poison into the baby, Joxin or whatever chemical that you use to physically kill the child that you want to evict, right?
Yeah,
I'm trying to use their words. So
sure.
there is an active killing of the child where the cause of the death is you injecting it, you ripping its arms off, you crushing its head. Whereas with the violinist, what kills the violinist is the disease that they had to begin with, right? So
Yeah.
there, that too is another difference between the analogy of the violinist and the abortion itself, the
So
action of the killing.
yeah, and one thing I would add in here too is I've seen some libertarians. I can't think of the main guy's name who came up with this concept, but I've seen some libertarians try to get around the argument that you're making right here by saying, "Well, we're not going to perform an abortion. We don't agree with performing abortions. We're not going to dismember the child. We're not going to poison the child. All we're simply going to do is induce labor in the woman." And force the child to be born. And then if the child lives, the child lives. If the child dies, the child dies. But but even that, the problem with that argument is the child's perfectly healthy inside of the mother. And by your induction of her labor when the child's not ready to be born yet, the child dies as a direct result of your action of delivering the baby. And so, and I wanted to bring that up because I know if there's any libertarians listening right now, that argument's probably flashing in their mind. But it doesn't really get them out of what you're talking about because the death of the child still comes as a direct result of their action. So it's not like the guy with the kidney, because he's going to die of whatever he was sick from. If you induce the baby to be born before the baby's ready to be born, then you're still morally culpable. You're still it is the action that you took that still brought about the death of that baby. And so I just wanted to jump in and throw that out there for that objection.
Yeah, I would go into that a little bit more if we have time later.
Yeah.
So another thing that I would discuss when it comes to this idea is the amount of time as well, right? So you're connected to this violinist with an indefinite time period, right? There is no end whatsoever. You are attached to this person for the rest of your life, or they
Yeah.
die. Is the argument that they're making, right? There is no leaving this situation at all. You're bound to them indefinitely, forever,
Yeah.
until one of you dies, right? Now, where that breaks down in the analogy is we know how long the gestational period is, right? We know how long a baby is in the womb until birth, and that's roughly around 40 weeks plus or minus, right?
Yeah.
So there is a short amount of time that is a known time. And that makes a huge difference in the morality behind, can you kill or evict the one that is inside of you, right? And I think that is another place where that analogy breaks down is that there is not an indefinite time that the child is inside the woman's body, connected to the placenta to get its nutrients and to grow inside the uterus and to develop all of these things. That there is a set time limit to
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
where we know that it's approximately 9 months that this child is going to be inside of your body. So the contractual agreement, as it were, is a 9-month period
Yeah.
in its
With
entirety
an indefinite.
from the time you have sex, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then once that baby is born, well, we could talk about what the obligations of parents are to children that are born, but in terms of the baby living off of your body or your body having to provide
Right,
for the necessity for that baby to survive, that is going to end at the moment that the baby is born. And so, yeah, so
right,
so far here, you have three different ways that this analogy is not like uh, it's not like the conception of a baby. Okay, so what would be your next thing?
right. So yeah, I mean, and I think all of those combined really just show the lack of substance really to this bodily autonomy argument when it comes to that analogy in particular. I mean,
Yeah.
And I think some of the strongest goes to, the difference between the direct killing versus they're dying of whatever disease, the causal relationship between, ripping a baby apart from, separating yourself from the violinist,
Yeah.
and their natural death as a result of their disease versus the natural death as a result of injecting the baby with digoxin, or
Yeah.
ripping the baby apart, or suffocating the baby, or those
Yeah.
types of things,
Sure.
so
Yeah. So let's okay, so I think that we went through that. That was good analysis on that analogy. I do want to take a minute because we said we are going to talk about it here. I think it's important to take a minute to talk specifically about the issue of rape and conception because I think that
right.
was a good answer to that analogy, but I'm sure that there are still questions in people's minds about, well, if the woman was not morally complicit in the conception of the baby, then how could she possibly be morally responsible for the life of the baby once the baby's conceived? So, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so I mean, that is the question. Are you morally obligated to not kill someone, right?
Yeah,
And I think all of us would, with God's law on us, all recognize that you shall not murder, right?
yeah,
That there is an injustice done,
yeah,
right? So why is rape wrong? Well, rape is wrong because there you have a stronger person oppressing through violent means a weaker person.
yeah,
And we need to say that is wrong, and that the person that does the oppression ought to be found, tried, and punished, right?
amen. Yeah,
But that does not mean that the child who is now the weaker needs to be oppressed by the stronger, who is the mother,
yeah.
to death, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with that. I think the primary reason why it would be wrong for that mother to kill the baby is because you don't, no matter what happens, you don't have moral grounds that justify taking the life of another human being.
Right.
Obviously, we would want to take time to explain what you just said about rape. That person needs to be hunted down and prosecuted. The other, a lesser reason, so that would be the moral reason, and then a lesser reason would be, I mean, how many instances do we know of where a woman has had an abortion after she was raped, and that just made things worse for her, right? Because
Hmm.
you're destroying another human being, and God did not create us for that, right? It messes a
Hmm.
person up when you do that. And so not only is it morally wrong, but it's also morally wrong on our part. So let's look at the pro-life angle on this with the rape exception. It's morally wrong on our part to tell that woman that, well, it's okay for you to murder your baby because you were raped, and that's going to make your life better if you just go ahead and murder your baby,
Hmm.
because nobody should have to have a baby
Hmm.
by their abuser. But it's not going to make her
Hmm.
life better. It's going to make her life worse. Well, why is
Hmm.
it going to make her life worse? Well, because she's violating the moral law of God, and she's going to have innocent blood on her hands.
Hmm.
And you just took this woman, or she just took herself, from being a victim to being a perpetrator. And we're not doing her any favors by not being honest with her about what the law of God says. And so, where it
Hmm.
comes to rape, women who have been victims of rape, certainly our compassion and our heart goes out to them, and we love them and want to care for them. But that the fact that they were raped does not give them moral grounds to take the life of that child.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, what would be, because we got a few more minutes here, I think, if unless there's something else you want to discuss here, which I'm wide open to, but what you said you wanted to come back to the issue of delivering the baby. Let's say a lot of libertarians are in favor of this idea of, we'll just evict the baby from the woman's body. So we're not going to perform an abortion like a suction abortion or a dismemberment abortion or all these different or a chemical abortion. We're just going to induce labor in the woman and evict the baby from the woman's body. And therefore, we're not morally culpable for the fact that the baby dies, because the baby just dies as a natural result of the fact that they were born too soon. What would your answer be back to that?
Yeah, I don't think that's well thought out, honestly. And like, we already recognize that there's a moral obligation to a child once they're born.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't believe that moral obligation starts once they're born. I think the moral obligation starts once they're conceived, because they're a brand new instantiation of humanity from the time of conception, right?
Amen. Yeah.
So by putting the person in uh, intentionally putting the person in the place where they are going to die, I think is the problem. That is the moral issue, right? So are you morally bound to prevent someone as far as you can from being in a position of dying? And I think Christians should say yes. I mean, this is why we look at each other's circumstances greater than ours. This is why we have charity. This is why we love our neighbor, right? I mean, that is part of what we as Christians do, is not put people in a position where they will die.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's it's because of the value that we place on human life, the value we place
Right.
on the image of God and others. And so, yeah, I totally agree. So I think this idea of my body, my choice, even so, if we take the slogans, so to speak, and we sort of set them aside and we evaluate this argument at its core and seek to properly understand it, that it has to do with consent, and we talk about consent, I think we pretty much still can boil this thing down to, that, in the overwhelming instances of a woman getting pregnant, she consented to the conception of the baby, and she is morally obligated to allow that baby to live in her and be born, because you don't have the right to kill another human being without just cause, right? The second, and you deciding all of a sudden that you don't want to give consent anymore is not just cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we're talking about women who have been involved in rape, that's obviously a difficult, terrible circumstance, and we want to be able to help and walk alongside those women as much as we can. But at the same time, you still don't have just cause to take the life of that child, and that's really what this
Right.
thing boils down to. It comes
Right.
back to our foundational moral premise, right? When we come back to that and we examine the situation, it is your body, and you have autonomy with your body to use it such that you bring honor and glory to God, because that's what God gave it to you for. But taking the life of another human being falls outside of the pale of that purpose. So that would
Right.
be that's kind of my concluding thought on it. Did you have anything else you want to talk about with it, or any other objections you
Yeah,
wanted to bring up?
so I would encourage people to actually think through the arguments and not just come out with slogans, right? And
Yeah.
pithy little statements are good, that they're helpful sometimes, but really understand the intention behind them, and you know honestly engage with the argument. And I
Yeah.
think that would be more helpful, so that you're not just talking past each other.
Amen. And there's a lot of that happening out there in the world right now.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I want to do something a little bit different here. Closing out the podcast, I'll read our closing here. But one thing I wanted to mention is that you have some speaking engagements coming up, and one of the things I think would be helpful is if we invite our listeners to some of the things that you have coming up. Do you have? I should have told you I was doing this ahead of time, but I kind of came up with it on the fly. So, did you want to talk about some of those speaking engagements and invite people to join you for some of those?
Sure. um, let me see. In April, I will be up at the Free Will Baptist Abolition Conference somewhere Oklahoma, south of Oklahoma City, at a university.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. Randall University, I think is the name.
Yeah.
So pray for those guys. Pray for that event, and if you're in the area, come check it out. May I'll be with you at
Yeah.
the regional OSA event.
Yeah. I'm looking
So
forward to that. That's going to be awesome. We got some good speakers lined up for that as well. Yeah, that'll be in Alabama, right? Birmingham,
right,
Alabama. So that's going to be a great event. We'll have a table there for the podcast with some T-shirts on it and stuff like that. So I think that'll be awesome. And then we're also both going to be at Apologia in June, right, for the OSA National event.
right,
So just
right.
wanted to invite the people to listen to our podcast, just to let them know, hey, here's some things that we're going to be at. If you want to come out and meet us, you want Callie to sign a copy of his book, or you want to grab a T-shirt. How much should we sell the T-shirts for at those events? Is it $20? I don't know. I guess I shouldn't
I
throw a
think
number
it's
out
like
there.
25 or 30. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever it
It
is.
depends. Right.
Come out, grab a T-shirt, get a bumper sticker. We sell stickers, and yeah. So I want to invite everybody to come out and involve themselves in those events. There's usually some really good speakers at these events, and you can learn a lot if you want to get involved in abolitionism. So check out Operation Save America's Facebook page for event details, and then also check out the Free Will Baptists of Oklahoma. They have their event up on Facebook as well, so you can run out there and grab that for details. So. In the meantime, as we're closing it out here, I just wanted to invite everybody to join the resistance and wield the sword of truth. Our Lord has left us here to navigate this world as priest in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.